London, 1987. A skinny 20-year-old boy stands shivering on the cold concrete edge of a diving platform 10 meters above a pool of water that looks more like glass than liquid. His name is Jason Statham. To the world watching, he is a future Olympian, a member of Britain's national diving squad, a body sculpted by discipline and silence. But beneath that wet skin and clenched jaw, he is something else entirely. He is a boy who has just realized in this exact second that he will never be good enough. Not for gold, not for glory, not for the father who never came to watch. There is an irony in Jason Statham's story that hurts too much to be coincidence. The child who couldn't speak up in classrooms because his accent and his poverty made him a punchline. The teenager who found freedom in the silent, weightless seconds between a diving board and the water, where no one could mock him mid-air. The icon who built his entire identity on a body that never trembled, a stare that never blinked, a voice that never wavered. All of that, so that life would arrive decades later and begin testing whether the man behind the bald head and the bulletproof glare could survive being human after all. How does a working-class boy from a forgotten English town, raised by a lounge singer father who chased dreams across continents, become the last true action star Hollywood ever manufactured? What was hiding behind that permanent scowl, that clipped accent, that refusal to smile on red carpets? And what happens when a man who built his entire career on being indestructible suddenly has to face the one opponent he cannot punch, cannot outrun, cannot intimidate? The slow, patient erosion of time itself. To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to a gray industrial town in Derbyshire, to the summer of 1967, and to a boy who learned, in the cruelest way possible, that the world rewards those who hide their softness behind something harder. Jason Michael Statham was born on July 26, 1967, in Shirebrook, a small mining town in Derbyshire, England, where the coal dust still clung to the bricks and the streets carried the quiet exhaustion of a community that had been promised much and given little. The houses were narrow, the skies were heavy, and the future, for most boys like him, was already written in the soot of the chimneys above. There was no theater here, no glamour, no whispered promises of Hollywood. There was only the wind, the rain, and the ordinary cruelty of growing up, where dreams were considered a kind of arrogance. His father, Barry Statham, was a street seller and a part-time lounge singer, a man who chased applause across pubs and holiday resorts, often disappearing for weeks chasing the next gig in the Canary Islands or some smoky bar in southern Spain. His mother, Eileen, a dancer-turned-homemaker, held the family together with the patience of women who had stopped expecting fairness from life. There was no luxury, no industry connections, no paved road to fame. But there was something more powerful than all of that. There was a child who watched his father disappear and learned, before he could even name the feeling, that love was something you had to earn by being useful. The wound, the one that would shape every cold-eyed character he would ever play, was not a single blow, but 1,000 small ones. Jason was small for his age, scrappy, and spoke with the thick working-class accent that British schools punished without mercy. In the classroom, his words came out wrong, slow, twisted by a regional dialect that teachers corrected with public sighs. The other boys mocked him, the soft-voiced kid who couldn't read out loud without stumbling. In the hallways, he wasn't Jason. He was the gypsy kid, the traveler boy, the one who showed up to school in the same shoes for 2 winters. The bullying carved scars deeper than any fist could cause, and he learned very early that silence was safer than ridicule, that a hard face was a kind of armor, and that if you couldn't win with words, you had to win with something else. His father, when he was home, taught him how to sell anything to anyone: jewelry on street corners, perfume out of suitcases, lies to suspicious customers. Years later, Jason would confess with a voice flattened by old shame, "I was a hustler before I knew what the word meant. My dad sold fake gold on the street, and I stood next to him learning how to read a man's eyes before he said no." Those words were not nostalgia. They were a confession of a childhood spent watching his father survive on charm because the world had given him nothing else. At 15, the first dream broke quietly. Jason had fallen in love with martial arts and football, but it was diving, the strange, isolating sport of throwing your body off a platform, that gave him purpose. He trained obsessively at Crystal Palace, rising before dawn, swimming until his lungs burned, perfecting twists in midair that no boy from Shirebrook had any business attempting. For 12 years, he climbed the ranks of British diving, eventually placing 8th in the 1990 Commonwealth Games and competing for England on the world stage. For most boys, that would have been the dream. For Jason, it was the slow realization that no matter how high he climbed, he would never reach the top of the platform that mattered. The Olympics passed him by. The medals went to other men. And at 25, broke and quietly broken, he stepped off the diving board for the last time, knowing the only thing waiting for him on the ground was the same gray town that had never expected him to leave. With the diving career closed, Jason discovered acting almost by accident, through a circumstance so absurd it sounded like fiction. He had been modeling sportswear for the French Connection brand to pay his bills, hustling on the side, selling perfume and fake jewelry on London street corners, just like his father had taught him decades before. One afternoon in 1995, a young filmmaker named Guy Ritchie walked past the stall, watched Jason talk a skeptical tourist into buying counterfeit cologne with the smooth, dangerous charm of a Bourne Street performer, and froze. Ritchie wasn't looking for an actor. He was looking for the real thing. A man who could play a hustler because he had been one. He approached the stall, introduced himself, and asked Jason if he had ever thought about being on camera. And when Jason stood in front of that lens for the first time, on the chaotic, cigarette-stained set of lock, stock, and 2 smoking barrels, something extraordinary happened. The boy who had been mocked for his accent suddenly heard his own voice come back at him through the speakers, and it sounded right. The Cockney bark, the rough London edges, the working-class music of his speech, all the things that had once made him a target were now exactly what made him magnetic. The wound did not disappear. It transformed. The accent that teachers had tried to scrub out of him became the very texture that audiences would soon be unable to forget. It wasn't talent yet. It was recognition. The silent, absolute certainty of having found the place where he belonged. The only place where every part of him, the hustler, the diver, the lonely boy from Derbyshire, could finally exist at once without apology. Only Jason was free when pretending to be someone close enough to himself that the pretending stopped being a lie. At 28, with barely a few £100 in his pocket and a single duffel bag of borrowed shirts, Jason moved properly into central London, leaving behind the rented rooms of his hustling years. No agent, no safety net, no backup plan. London in the late 1990s was not kind to dreams. It was a city that ground them down slowly, with the cold indifference of a place that had already seen too many young men arrive with hope and leave with empty hands. The city didn't welcome him with applause. It welcomed him with slammed doors, with casting directors who told him his face was wrong for leading roles, with agents who said his accent was too thick for international audiences, with producers who looked at his shaved head and saw only a thug, never a star. He took whatever work would have him. He loaded crates at dawn, drove unlicensed cars through streets that never slept, modeled tracksuits for catalog photos he hoped no one he knew would ever see. He counted coins on Sunday nights to make rent, shared cramped flats with other actors equally hungry and equally stubborn, and sat through casting after casting where the door slammed in his face. Your appearance is strange. Your voice is too aggressive. You're not handsome enough. You're not soft enough. You're not anything we know how to sell. He kept count, in a small notebook he never showed anyone, of every rejection. By his own admission, the number passed 100 before he stopped writing them down. There were moments when London felt not like an opportunity, but like a trap. The lowest point came on a wet November night in 1996 in a damp basement flat in North London, when Jason sat on the edge of a bare mattress and counted the last 20 pounds he had to his name. He had not eaten properly in 3 days. He had sold his diving medals, the only physical proof of his old life, to a pawn shop on Holloway Road for less than the price of a decent dinner. Years later, he would admit, with that flat, unreadable voice that hides everything, "I sold the medals because I was hungry. I told myself they were just metal. But every step I walked out of that shop, I felt like I was leaving the only version of myself I had ever been proud of." In December of that same year, something exploded inside him. He watched a late-night rerun of a Bruce Lee documentary on a borrowed television and saw for the first time a man who had built an entire mythology on the same thing he had been hiding: controlled aggression, weaponized silence, the body as language. He ran back to his flat and over a single weekend wrote pages of audition notes, retrained his diving discipline into combat choreography, and called Guy Ritchie's office every day for 2 weeks until someone finally returned the call. Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels wasn't just a film. It was Jason Statham's life poured onto celluloid, the hustler, the outsider, the man marked by class and accent, redeemed through pure will. When the offers started coming after that first film, they came with conditions. American producers wanted him to soften his accent, lose the Cockney, file down the edges of his voice for international markets. One studio offered him a substantial sum, a small fortune for someone who had been pawning medals 2 years earlier, on the condition that he take voice coaching to neutralize his speech. Jason said no. He knew with absolute certainty that if the accent went, there would be no Jason Statham left at all. It was him or nobody. Finally, the studios gave in. Guy Ritchie cast him again in Snatch in 2000 with a modest budget and minimal interference, and the film exploded like a Molotov cocktail thrown into the polite living room of British cinema. It earned over $80 million worldwide against a budget of $10 million, and overnight, Jason Statham became a name. Then came The Transporter in 2002, a small French production that grossed $43 million globally. Then Crank. Then the Italian Job. Then a relentless decade of films that turned him into the last true action star Hollywood would ever build from scratch. By 2017, the Fast and Furious franchise alone, in which he played the villain turned anti-hero Deckard Shaw, had pushed his collective box office past $15 billion worldwide. It wasn't just success. It was a cultural phenomenon. And Jason the hustler nobody wanted, the diver who had missed the Olympics, the boy whose medals had been sold for the price of a hot meal, was suddenly the voice of millions of working-class men who refused to apologize for where they came from. The accent the schools had tried to erase was now the most imitated voice in action cinema. The hard face he had built as armor at 12 years old was now insured for millions. The diving discipline he had thought wasted now choreographed every fight scene the world could not stop watching. But behind the red carpets and 9-figure paychecks, something was beginning to crack. Jason had spent his entire life refusing stunt doubles, performing his own fights, his own falls, his own crashes through windows and across rooftops. By 2015, the body that had been his only reliable instrument was beginning to file its own complaints. He had survived a near-fatal accident on the set of Expendables 3 when the brakes failed on a truck he was driving and it plunged off a pier into the Black Sea. He had broken ribs on 3 different productions, torn shoulder ligaments twice, and damaged his lower back so severely that some mornings he could not stand without bracing against a wall. "I've broken almost everything that can be broken," he admitted in one interview, with that bitter half-smile that always preceded honesty. But I would do it all again. The personal cost was quieter and deeper. For years, the press hunted him through a long public relationship with the model Kelly Brook, a romance that ended in 2004 after 7 years, and a heartbreak he never spoke about directly, but carried in the long pause that always followed her name. He withdrew, dated rarely, and built walls higher than any tabloid could climb. Then in 2010, on a fashion shoot in London, he met Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, 20 years younger, calm in ways the world rarely was. They became one of the most photographed couples on Earth, and yet somehow one of the most private. They had 2 children, a son in 2017 and a daughter in 2022. He never spoke their names in public. He guarded them with the same quiet ferocity he had once used to guard himself. But fame extracted its tax in other ways. In 2018, his mother Eileen passed away after a long illness, and Jason, who had built his career on the unflinching face of a man who feels nothing, disappeared from public life for months. A pain he later admitted in a rare unguarded moment that broke me in places no punch ever reached. She was the one who told me I could leave Shirebrook. She was the one who never doubted. Fame gave him everything, but it also stole his peace, his privacy, and irreplaceable pieces of his heart. By the early 2020s, the whispers had begun. Critics called him obsolete, a one-note action figure aging out of his own genre. Streaming algorithms favored younger faces. Studios that had once chased him now hesitated. He confessed to a friend in a now-quoted interview, "I felt invisible again, like when I was a child. The world had forgotten how to hear me." But Jason Statham had survived worse things than oblivion. In 2023, at 56, he starred in The Beekeeper, a film the studios expected to fail. It earned over $160 million on a $40 million budget. In 2024, a working man followed and outperformed every projection. He had proven something devastating to an industry obsessed with youth, that authenticity has no expiration date, and that the men who built themselves from nothing do not crumble simply because the trend has changed. Today, at 58, Jason Statham lives quietly between Los Angeles and Malibu with Rosie and their 2 children, his body carrying the slow ache of every stunt he refused to hand to a double, his face still carved with the same expression the schoolyard once mocked. He fishes on weekends, a hobby inherited from his father, the only soft thing he has ever publicly admitted to loving. And yet, he remains standing, not as the invincible enforcer of the movies, but as the man who understood that real strength isn't never falling, it's getting back up every time the world decides you are finished. His legacy isn't the kicks, the chases, the explosions. It is the living proof that the boy nobody listened to can become the voice an entire generation cannot forget. What lesson do you take from Jason Statham's story? How many times have you stood up when everyone expected you to stay down? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who turned scars into legends. Because in the end, as Jason himself once said, the hardest punch life throws is the one that asks if you'll get up again.